How's it going, everyone? This video is going to be a bit more of an extension on my last video, in which I went into some signs and synchronicities that have been occurring in my life, ultimately leading me to find out my direct paternal line is of Ephraim, and they actually intermarry into Judah, rather than my previous speculation that my direct paternal line would be from Judah, possibly Zerah. I also mentioned how both I and many people in the UK would have Levitic descent, as the Levites become the Druids who were most prominent in Ireland and Britain. But what I didn't explain is how these Levites were partially descended from Moses. As time progresses, I am realizing more and more how the lines of people like Joseph, Zerah, and Moses are actually amalgamated in a specific region of the earth. This video is going to expand on the Levitic portion of not only the British Isles, but also Scandanavia. This will therefore provide more evidence that corroborates my claims that the R1b haplogroup and Rhesus negative bloodline are the most accurate and direct representation of the ancient Israelites, and how the people within these nations accurately depict what an ancient Levite would have looked like. And to be clear, this part of the video is not meant to claim superiority or say these specific traits make you better than others, but it is to vindicate those who have been demonized. It is for people who look like me and have felt called since their youth, feeling like they are meant for more, but constantly hear that they are the seed of demons or the Nephilim, being called things like Esau and Edomite and leper, and being bashed and picked on for their uniqueness by people who have no clue what they're talking about. So to start, we're going to get into Moses. Moses had two sons, the first being Gershom and the second Eliezer. Eliezer is said to have only had one son, who was named Rehabiah. Rehabiah had Jeshiah, who had Joram, who had Zichri, who had Shelomith. Now this would be a direct line from Eliezer. However, it is mentioned that Rehabiah had many sons, whereas Eliezer only had one. Therefore, there might be more lines from Rehabiah that are not mentioned. However, the only line that is mentioned is Rehabiah down to Shelomith. Now, Chronicles chapter 26, verses 25 to 26 explains that Shelomith and his brothers were tasked with overseeing all the treasuries of King David within Jerusalem. This leads me to speculate that most of Eliezer's descendants would be within Jerusalem, dwelling amongst Judah. This actually parallels the bloodline of Shebuel, who was the firstborn of Gershom, the firstborn of Moses. This is because prior to Shelomith and his brother's time overseeing the treasuries, Shebuel was the chief officer tasked with being in charge of the treasuries. And this is recorded as being in the time of David. I should note that David's temple was never built because he sinned and wasn't allowed by Yahweh to make the temple. So Shebuel may have been there collecting materials and metals for the temple so that it could be built, but may not have actually been there during the actual construction during the time of Solomon. I believe the name Shebuel is prophetic, as it means captive of El. And his bloodline, along with his cousins from Eliezer, dwelled in Judah and were most likely taken captive and sent to Babylon during the Babylonian siege of Jerusalem. The fact that he is named captive of God may indicate that his bloodline was taken and decided to remain in Babylon rather than return home to Judah during the reign of King Cyrus. However, this is just my theory, and it is definitely possible that the line of Shebuel did return to Judah when they were rebuilding the temple. Regardless, we would find the descendants of Moses through Eliezer and Shebuel, son of Gershom, amongst the true descendants of the tribe of Judah. In one of my upcoming videos, I will go into who these descendants are, and I will separate the Edomites from the Israelites, from the Assyrians, from the Nubians. Now things start getting a lot more specific when we look into the bloodline of Gershom's second son, Jonathan. Through him, I believe we can pinpoint a few nations that would most certainly have descent from Moses. The biggest clue of all is within Judges 18, verses 1 to 19 and 30. It reads, In those days Israel had no king, and in those days the tribe of the Danites was seeking a place of their own where they might settle, because they had not yet come into an inheritance among the tribes of Israel. So the Danites sent 5 of their leading men from Zorah to Eshtal to spy out the land and explore it. These men represented all the Danites. They told them, "Go, explore the land." So they entered the hill country of Ephraim and came to the house of Micah, where they had spent the night. When they were near Micah's house, they recognized the voice of a young Levite. So they turned in there and asked him, "Who brought you here? What are you doing in this place? Why are you here?" He told them what Micah had done for him, and said, "He has hired me, and I am his priest." They said to him, "Please inquire of God to learn whether our journey will be successful." The priest answered them, "Go in peace. Your journey has the Lord's approval." So the 5 men left and came to Laish, where they saw that the people were living in safety, like the Sidonians, at peace and secure. And since their land lacked nothing, they were prosperous. Also, they lived a long way from the Sidonians, who, by the way, are the Phoenicians, and had no relationship with anyone else. When they returned to Zorah and Eshtal, their fellow Danites asked them, "How did you find things?" They answered, "Come on, let's attack them. We have seen the land, and it is very good. Are you going to do something? Don't hesitate to go there and take it over. When you get there, you will find an unsuspecting people and a spacious land that God has put into your hands, a land that lacks nothing whatever." Then 600 men of the Danites, armed for battle, set out from Zorah and Eshtal. Now, quick mention, does this not sound exactly like something the Vikings would do? Like, if you have ever seen an episode of Vikings, or, research them in general, this is Danite behavior. By the book, literally. They would go out, scout areas, and attack people who were unsuspecting. And one thing that is underreported on the Vikings is that they usually actually pick battles where they knew they would be superior and would have an easy chance at winning. So here's the Danites going out and attacking an unsuspecting people, which is literally foreshadowing their future and what they do throughout all of Europe. So back to verse number 12. On their way, they set up a camp near Kiriath Jearim in Judah. This is why the place west of Kiriath Jearim is called Mahane Dan to this day. From there they went on to the hill country of Ephraim and came to Micah's house. Then the 5 men who had spied out the land of Laish said to their fellow Danites, "Do you know that one of these houses has an ephod, some household gods, and an image overlaid with silver? Now you know what to do." So they turned in there and went into the house of the young Levite at Micah's house and greeted him. The 600 Danites, armed for battle, stood at the entrance of the gate. The 5 men who had spied out the land went inside and took the idol, the ephod, and the household gods, while the priest and the 600 armed men stood at the entrance of the gate. When the 5 men went into Micah's house and took the idol, the ephod, and the household gods, the priest said to them, "What are you doing?" They answered him, "Be quiet, don't say a word. Come with us and be our father and priest. Isn't it better that you serve a tribe and clan in Israel as a priest rather than one man's household?" The priest was very pleased. He took the ephod and the household gods and the idol and went along with the people. Putting their little children, their livestock, and their possessions in front of them, they turned away and left. Now we can skip a bit, and it says, "Then they took what Micah had made, and his priest, and went on to Laish against the people at peace and secure. They attacked them with the sword and burned down their city. There was no one to rescue them, because they lived a long way from Sidon, and had no relationship with anyone else. The city was in a valley near Beth Rehob." The Danites rebuilt the city and settled there. They named it Dan. And this is actually foreshadowing a long-standing tradition that they carry out for thousands of years. And this is essentially how you can track the places they have been. They named it Dan after their ancestor Dan, who was born to Israel, though the city used to be called Laish. There the Danites set up for themselves the idol, and Jonathan, the son of Gershom, the son of Moses, and his sons were priests for the tribe of Dan until the time of the captivity of the land. They continued to use the idol Micah had made all the time the house of God was in Shiloh. So evidently, Moses' descendants, through his grandson Jonathan, turned to idol worship due to their time in the country of Ephraim in the house of Micah. And they then get taken by the Danites to Laish in the north and set up the city of Dan overtop the city they burnt down. Now take in, this is Moses' grandson, one of the greatest prophets. Within 2 generations, his descendants are worshipping idols and turning away from Yahweh. Now to add on to this, one of Dan's prophecies is that he has to await salvation. Most people believe it is solely for his violent actions, as a serpent in the path biting the horse's heel, causing the rider to fall backwards. However, it is also due to his continual idol worship. Most people believe that Dan's history of spiritual adultery begins when the Ephraimite king raises the calf in Dan, or when they turn to Odin worship and start idolizing their ancestor. But it actually links further back to this event, in which the Danites looted idols from the house of Micah and stole his servant to make their priest. Now the city they migrate to is named Laish, however they rename it Dan in accordance to a tradition where they rename locations after their patriarch. This new settlement was also near the border of Naphtali, and this is key to remember because it is prophetic of not only the later descendants of Levi, but more specifically Moses. This will be further explained later. For now, let's focus on the book of Judges, as the last verse that I read says that Jonathan's descendants remain in Dan until the Assyrian captivity. This means that they were exiled along with the house of Omri. Now, if you watch my video on the Israelites, or the documentary on the Israelites, you would know that the house of Omri are the Bit-Khumri, and they are actually exiled north through the Caucasus Mountains by the Assyrians, therefore becoming Scythian tribes as well as Germanic tribes. Now, most black Hebrew Israelites will say that this group of people were black Africans with big afros. However, when you look at the black obelisk of Shalmaneser III, it clearly depicts Jehu of the house of Omri with straight wavy hair and a straight wavy beard. Now, like I just explained, this group branches off in numerous chains of migrations westward, forming various Germanic tribes. My video also goes over how Dan and Naphtali primarily end up in Scandinavia and the British Isles. Based on the verses I just read, these are the exact tribes who carried the bloodline of Jonathan, son of Gershom. That being said, I believe it's possible that the people across the entire migrational route of these tribes would carry Levitic and Mosaic descent. Here's a quick clip from TruthVids on the tribe of Levi.
On to Levi, he had one symbol, and that was the breastplate, the 12 stones of Israel representing each tribe. The breastplate was of course because Levi was given the Levitical priesthood and they wore them. Levi was also spread amongst the tribes but as the priests. However, these symbols never appeared as coat of arms. This is because Levi, although they were all across Europe like the other tribes, they were actually the ancient Druids. When the Israelites began spreading and colonizing Europe, they brought with them these Levitical priests, and over time they simply got known as Druids. They are most known as being in Britain, however originally they were in fact all over Europe. The Romans outlawed Druidism and gradually began to purge it within the empire. The last safe haven was Britain, but once Christ came there was no longer a need for the Levitical priesthood, and the same with Druids. They all became Christians, and so the 12-stone symbol disappeared.
So even though we have no heraldic proof of Levitic descent, Scripture shows how the tribes of Naphtali and Dan, who are primarily in Scandinavia and the British Isles, brought Levites along with them during their migrations, many of these Levites belonging to the bloodline of Moses. Now I want to bring up Dan and Naphtali symbols because these become prominent Druidic symbols within Ireland, which is where the most prominent of Druids dwelled. Naphtali's symbol is a deer or a stag, as his prophecy says that he will be a hind let loose. But Dan's symbols would be the eagle, the scales of judgment, because his name Dan actually means judge, and the serpent because he will be a serpent in the path, biting the horse's heel, causing the rider to fall back. Now it seems like along this migration, the Levites, who were the priestly castes of these tribes, began to deify their symbolic Israelite standards. It would only make sense that these are the sons of Jonathan, as they are mimicking and repeating what their forefather did with Dan. So essentially, history repeats, and the story of Jonathan, the descendant of Moses, is prophetic and foreshadows what his descendants would also be doing. Now, I'm going to repost a video I made claiming that the Star of David is the Star of Remphan, and I will actually tie it into Ephraim, because as I mentioned in my Ephraim video, it was actually an Ephraimite king who raised the bull in Dan. And later in this video, you will see how Ephraim, Levi, and Judah are actually very tied together. But back to the Levites. Like I keep saying, the most prominent of Levites were in Ireland. And I mention this because despite the toll for paganism being destruction and death, the greatest of the Druidic sects across Europe were those of the Irish Druids, and they actually rose to high levels of prominence. As I go over in my video on the Israelites, Ireland is partially Danite, and therefore also would carry descent from Moses. Now I want to bring up one part of the Bible that actually might foreshadow that Moses will actually be made into a greater nation than the rest of the Levites. As Moses is receiving the commandments from the angels and Yahweh on the mountain, his brother Aaron is setting up a bull for the Israelites at the bottom of the mountain, and they are turning back to paganism. Yahweh says he wants to destroy them for their absolute disregard for Yahweh. He says, Moses, I want to make you into a single great nation. However, Moses pleads with him and says, please do not do this. Remember the covenant you made with my forefathers, that you would multiply them and make them into great nations. Remember the blessings of my forefathers. And Yahweh said, okay, I will not destroy them. But you go down, you give them these commandments, and you tell them to repent. Now, Moses never gets made into a single great nation. However, I believe that it's still possible that Moses' descendants were blessed and that Yahweh did have a plan to make Moses greater than the rest of the Levites. And if they are the Irish Druids who partially descend from Moses, it would all make sense because the Irish Druids were the most revered Druids in the world. That being said, they did turn to paganism. They start worshipping things like the stag and the deer and the serpent and the eagle. All the symbols that they got from their Israelite forefathers as clues to their identity. Now, one more thing that ties the Irish Druids specifically back to Israel is that the Irish Druids' biggest symbol of all is the harp. This is typically representative of King David. However, it's also associated with the Levites, who were musicians of the temples. They used instruments such as the harp, lyre, and cymbal. What's incredible is that the end-time prophet/servant, the watchman of Ephraim, will also carry Levitic descent and be made the chief musician in New Jerusalem. So it is only right that the Ephraimite would be musically inclined, as he is coming from the British Isles, where not only the Levitic musicians dwelled, but also where the musically inclined sons of Zerah ben Judah lived. See, in my video on the Israelites, I go into how Northern Ireland is the land of Zerah, the son of Judah. And in my last video, I explain how it's also a part of the Ephraimite Company of Nations, aka the British Commonwealth. But what I never mention is that Zerah's son was named Mahol. Mahol means music or dance. This indicates that this group of people was musically inclined and were great musicians. Furthermore, Bible Hub actually connects it to the music of the temple. Now usually it's the Levites who are musicians of the temple. So why is it that the Judah line is being connected to music of the temple? Well, I don't know if Bible Hub is aware of the connection they made, but the line of Zerah eventually intermixes with the Levitic Druids who primarily situated themselves in Ireland. This group of Druids was probably brought in by Naphtali and the Danites, which contained the descendants of Moses. Furthermore, when we account for the fact that the end-time prophet/servant will be named chief musician, which is a Levitic role, and will be raised up from one of the northern Ephraimite nations, this connection made by Bible Hub may be symbolic that the end-time servant has descent from Mahol, son of Zerah, and his Ephraimite descent will be coming from Northern Ireland, rather than Scotland or England, which are other Ephraimite nations. This is because the land of Northern Ireland is what ties all the tribes and the traits of the end-time prophet together. It is an Ephraimite nation, which carries the bloodline of Moses the Levite, and also descends from Mahol, son of Zerah, son of Judah, and both Levi and Mahol's descendants were venerated for their musical talent. Therefore, when the Ephraimite prophet arrives, who is named co-regent under Yeshua as well as chief musician, he will probably be coming out of this nation, or at least will have paternal descent from there. This is because they're the Ephraimite nation, descended from Mahol and Moses, and this man, the end-time servant/prophet, will be a Moses type as well. So it is only right that he is descended from Moses. To add even more, I believe his lineage might also link to Wales, because this nation is known as the land of music, and they have a long history of folk music. The people of Wales actually call themselves the Khumri, which derives from Qumri, which is the Assyrian translation of House of Omri. Wales is also speculated to be the land of the Ark of the Covenant, which was carried by Levites. Now I'm going to play a few clips to drive home my point. The first is from Starchild 2009 and will explain the Levite connection to the Ark. And the second is from Welsh researcher Alan Wilson, connecting the Ark to the land of Wales. However, before I start, I want to make it clear that I do not agree with all the conclusions these researchers come to. However, I do believe many of the connections they make are very valid.
Hi, I'm Roberta Hill, the author of The Levite Priest and the Rh- blood type. Whenever I first started researching the Rh- blood type, it became very apparent to me that there is a connection between our blood type and the royal bloodline. Due to the blue blood term, and knowing that Rh- women had blue babies prior to the RhoGAM shot, and that we have copper blood, which copper turns a sort of a bluish green color whenever it oxidizes. So that connection is very apparent. But what is not so apparent is our connection to the high priest, or the Levite priest tribe. A lot of people don't know about that connection, so I wrote about it in this book. The Merovingian kings of France were known to be descendants of Jesus Christ and Mary Magdalene. Their name, Merovingian, means vine of Mary. The thing that I noticed with them is they had the title of priest kings. And whenever I really started thinking about that, I thought about the fact that Jesus also had both titles. This was abnormal. In the Jewish religion, the priest tribe was separate from the king tribe. The kings were in the tribe of Judah, the kings and queens. And the high priest were always in the Levite tribe. So this seemed obvious to me that at some point these two combined. And I found some other books that told about a prophecy of the next Levite high priest would also be kings. I believe it's in the book, The Testament of Levi. It tells about this prophecy, and this is exactly what happened with Jesus Christ. So that's how I became interested in it. It's apparent that the Sangreels have royal blood, but it's not talked about with the priest connection. Now, the priest had some interesting duties. Only they were allowed to serve in the tabernacle, and only the high priest could go into the Holy of Holies. Only the high priest were able to work with the Ark of the Covenant, which a lot of scholars believe has an electrical component to it. Ark, A-R-C, can mean electricity. So I started to put the two together, that our blood type is connected not only to the tribe of Judah, kings and queens, but it is also connected to the Levite tribe. So this book tells more about that. Also, our people are always associated with being witches or sorcery, that type of thing. Well, Jesus Christ performed many miracles in the Bible. He turned water into wine. He walked on water. He increased the bread loaves and the fish for the people to eat. He was a healer. All of these things would be considered, if people did them today, it would be considered magic. So I'm not all that surprised that this is the kind of thing that we're being accused of, being witches and so forth. That seems to be a part of our bloodline. So this book will tell you more about, the Levite tribe connection to our blood type and our mysterious ability to disrupt electrical appliances. That can be quite useful if you're working with an electrical appliance such as the Ark of the Covenant. So I believe our blood type was for a purpose, that we were made to be the way that we are for a specific purpose. So if you want to know more, you can get my book on Amazon, CreateSpace, or Kindle Books. Thank you for watching.
There are large earth mounds scattered right across Pasa Gwent and Glamorgan and up to Brecon. Maybe 50 miles that way and, across east to west and 30, 35 miles north to south.
Okay.
There's another great big patch of them down in Pembrokeshire, these mounds. My colleague said to me, what's the name of that? Because he's a Newcastle man. I'm half Newcastle and half Cardiff, father and mother. And I said, oh, bloody, it means ferocious warrior.
Right.
And I started thinking, hold it, And I said, that's what the ancient Egyptians and the ancient Arabs and the Hebrews called the constellation of Hercules.
Okay.
See? Forget the Romans, forget the Greeks, leave them out of it, because they're misleading. The concentration on them is wrong.
Right.
So we already knew there was another huge mound over to the east, and that's called Tumbalum, means the he-goat.
Right.
The billy goat. Well, hang about, the constellation main star Hercules, and then you've got Capricorn, the goat.
Right.
So we knew that we were looking perhaps at the main stars, the first and second magnitude.
Right.
The
brightest
constellations.
stars. Yeah.
Up on the hill then, down below, just outside Cardiff, the Garth Mountain, there are 3 mounds in a row, 2 big ones and 1 little one. Well, you know the Adrian Gilbert and Beauval business of the 2 big pyramids and the little one, the Belt of Orion.
Yeah. Orion's belt, the Giza pyramids, yeah, we all know
in
that.
In relation to these others, that was in the right position.
Okay.
Now once you know 2 or 3, you can triangulate and you find the pole star.
Okay.
And we did, we triangulated, and we found a standing stone.
Okay.
So we now had the pole star. And from there, you could work out all these other mounds.
We've got a map here. I'll just unfold it on the desk, which basically, you may not be able to see it too well, but you've charted on here. This is the pole star here. Yes. Am I right? Yeah. So where there's a huge standing stone.
They're not huge, but it's a standing stone.
Okay, it's standing stone. And there are many other Well, how many ancient mounds are there marked on this map, Alan? I mean,
Well,
there's
we've
probably
got 50 or 60 located.
50 or
so
60.
yeah.
And you believe that all of these mounds represent a bright star?
Yes,
or a
well,
constellation?
it can't be otherwise.
Right.
I mean, it's difficult to see it any other way.
Okay.
You look for, well, Taurus must be over there, and they're in the middle of it. An
Yeah.
estate in Cardiff is a
Yeah.
mound,
I mean,
you know.
and what about, so that means that if it was the people from, Assyria or the 10 tribes that made these mounds, that means they must all be after 500 BC, is that,
Well,
would
yeah.
that be right? Or
Well, we don't know.
don't know.
The first migration is from Syria to Britain with Albine.
Right.
Masses of evidence for that dug up by the great Leonard Woolley.
And what year was
Didn't
that?
realise it. He was excavating 1922 to 34. Got overshadowed by Tutankhamun, but his discoveries were greater.
Right. But what year were the discoveries from, would you say? Was that
Well, they would have come into Britain, the Syrians, right? That's how you get the name Surrey.
Right.
That's why in the Odyssey, Homer, in the Odyssey, Ulysses says to his farm bailiff, "Where are you from, actually?" "I'm in for the great island out in the Western Ocean called Surrey." Right. Surrey, you see?
Right, okay.
There's a hell of a lot of mix. But the point is that we now knew that these were star mounds.
Right.
And we also knew that we had the two migrations pegged down, because the archaeologists will tell you there are two sudden eruptions in Britain of huge, high-quality metalworking cultures.
Okay, Alan. Well,
And they come out of nowhere.
right. Well, we'll come back to the Ark of the Covenant in part 3.
Well, you see, when we were starting this research, way before we got to this, we met Lord Jack Brooks in the House of Lords. He said, if your research is on the Arthurian side are right, you could create a tourist industry in South Wales, he said, of at least 20,000 jobs. Now, I think we can create an industry of far more than 20,000 jobs. And it's not like a factory. You can't take it away and put it in India or somewhere. It's there for good, permanent.
I mean, this is why I give credence to your Ark of the Covenant work, because of the King Arthur work, which to me seems 100% plausible. The cross, the graves that you've uncovered. I mean, I think we should take a little bit of a look at the method that you used to locate the exact location, which was, we were talking before the break about the star maps. So you believe that these ancient mounds they're built in the pattern of constellations.
Yeah, they can't be otherwise. I mean, in the West Wales map, you've got the complete W of Cassiopeia, you've got the scepter of Sisi, the three in a bend. There's so much of it, indeed, of Hercules, and you've got Perseus the robber, and they're set out so precisely.
In the mounds?
It's difficult to see any other explanation.
Have you got any thought as to why the ancients used to do that? I mean, these mounds would take a long time to build. They're not little things.
These are not
some of them are 40 metres high, aren't they?
Some of them are huge, vast.
So nobody really knows why they would do that, just that they did.
Well, I think they knew a little bit more about what's up there than we do.
Right.
I think they knew a bit more than we think they did.
So, the actual constellation that you thought that the Ark of the Covenant would be buried at is?
Well, it's got to be within a zone, within the encompass of the entire system, right?
Yes.
And we think that zone is north of Cardiff, the Rhondda. That's the area where it's always been traditional about this chest.
And it's the constellation of Leo.
Well, we thought Leo, being the lion, was the emblem of Judah. Jerusalem was in Judah. That's where they had the temple. That's where they put the ark and so on. So we thought that was a good bet. So it was really a matter of finding the star Regulus, which is the biggest. There are two first magnitude stars in Leo. One is Denebola, one's Regulus. So we wanted to say where on the map and Regulus. And there's a vast mound where Regulus should be, a vast mound.
Yeah, I had a look at that last night
huge.
on Google Earth.
Yeah. And
it's a place called Unis, is that?
Unis.
It's a huge mound, isn't it? I mean, how big is it?
Well, it's a mound on top of a hill.
Okay.
And so you've got about a 60 feet addition, maybe 4 or 5 acres.
Right. And, it's quite a small object, 2 foot by 4 foot, the Ark of the Covenant. So you kind of did a survey and found various things within the mound. Is that right?
Well, no. What we did first, we located that there were 4 sumps along the north side.
Right, sumps.
Which I think I would describe them.
Describe them now.
Is like a bowl-shaped depression.
Mm-hmm.
It's a man-made bowl shape in the side of the hill.
Right. About, what, 12 feet in diameter?
Yeah, about that.
Right.
Underground chamber always had a hole in the floor.
Right.
And they dug a tunnel down towards the outside of the hill. If that's the hill, the tunnel goes down to the outside of the hill. So water coming into that chamber would run down the drain.
Mm-hmm.
When it got to underneath the bowl, the shaft would be underneath the bowl.
Mm-hmm.
They would make a little tick hole horizontally. So water would come down and have to flood upwards, stop it eroding anything away. So that little shaft would be filled with white stones of 3 types. And if for some reason or other no weeds grow in it, and you find that you've got this plug hole in each one, probably about 18 inches or more wide.
Right. So these stones are a special type of stone which the chemical composition must kill the weeds or stop it from growing.
Well, samples were taken to the National Museum and to a university, and the geologists established that these stones come from Cornwall, 300 miles away. So they knew what they were doing.
Right.
And
the whole purpose of these things is to keep whatever is inside there dry.
Dry. That's right. That was the purpose.
Right.
So we knew roughly from where the sumps were, where the chambers might be.
Okay.
And on the south side of the hill, looking down at Google Earth again, thank you Google, were tram lines.
Right.
Going, not starting from the top of the hill, but about a third of the way down. And we went round there and there was a lot of rubble going where if you dig a tunnel in somewhere, you throw the stuff out, it's going to roll straight down the hill, tram lines.
Right.
So someone had created a tunnel. So we knew where the tunnel was and where the sumps were, and we made a pretty accurate guess that there was a band of area between a certain zone that was worth looking at.
Right. So you then got...
We got Alan Hassel from London, who's, in my opinion, one of the best metal detector types in the world. He's the first guy in the world who ever managed to do metal detection underwater. You know, what a character.
Right.
Ordinary guy, but good at what he does. And he's got a detector that goes down 30 feet, and it'll differentiate between ferrous and non-ferrous metals.
Okay.
And we located an item 4 feet by 2 feet, non-ferrous metal, which is the size of the lid of the Ark of the Bible, as in the Bible. Ark of the Covenant, not the Ark of the Bible. And obviously, you know, that is the correct size. It's non-ferrous metal. It's in the right place.
And
take it from there.
Okay, so you were in contact with the landowners when you were doing this research.
Yes.
And, you know, I would be there with my shovel, digging it frantically if that was my land. I mean, what did the landowners say to you about this?
Well, I think they're typically Welsh farmers, and you know, they earn a living from selling, breeding sheep, and they're good businessmen. They've got other businesses as well.
Yeah.
I think they think we're slightly mad, if not completely gone. It's a big shock for them, and I think they've made the mistake of consulting some of the experts, you know, people in a university or so who've never thought of doing anything in this direction and have no knowledge whatsoever of what. I think there's a bit of, oh my God. The other thing they don't want is if a big fuss was made and there's nothing there, then they're going to have all sorts up there on the evenings and weekends.
The implications,
they don't want them on their land.
So let's say the Ark of the Covenant is there.
Yeah.
The implications are what to the history of Christianity, and you know, how would we have to rewrite things?
Well, Christianity starts off in Britain in 37 AD, the last year of Tiberius. For a start, it doesn't start in Rome.
Right.
It's taken to Rome in 51 AD by the family of Cranach.
Right.
So that is a fact. Cardinal Bronius, Cardinal Alfred, and
so
I
that
could quote you a whole
completely
list
flies in the
of
face of what would, you know, the mainstream historians would.
Well, if the mainstream historian does any historical research, then he'd have to agree with us.
Okay.
If they don't do any research, which is most of them, they just read each other's work.
And the other thing, if the Ark...
It's a fact, it's been admitted by the Bishop of Rome anyway.
Right. If the Ark was found there, it would possibly be some kind of unifying thing for Islam and Christianity?
Yes, I think so. I mean, the Muslims definitely believe in Moses, and so do the Jews, and so do the Christians. There's a lot of row going on at the moment with certain let's call them misguided people, want to dig underneath the Temple Mount and go under the mosque there,
Yes,
you know,
yes.
in Jerusalem. There'd be no need to do that because it's not there.
Yeah.
And therefore, you know, you might have a settlement of that contentious issue for a start.
Yeah.
They might find they've got something in common.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know.
Which could unify some of the
Yeah,
world's
if you look at
religions,
what
which
you've got
are,
in common,
you
rather
know,
than what your differences are.
I mean, I personally think that there are people who are trying to divide and conquer, you know, the religions of the world and put Muslims against Christians and you know,
Yeah.
create wars.
Well, it's always, religion has always resulted in wars. I mean, let's face it, it's time to stop it. The main thing that I would say is that this is not the only thing that we found using this system. There are 13 Mabinogi tales, right? And the last 3 are about knight errants going on their journeys. Peredur, his steel shirt, is Jupiter going around the stars,
Okay.
the planet.
Right.
Geraint is Mars going around on journeys through the stars.
Right.
You see?
Okay.
And not knights as we know them on Earth charging around the forest. You know?
I see. Yes.
And
Yes.
therefore, these stories tell us where to go for other things.
Right. So a planet, for example, on your mound map would not be in a fixed position.
No.
It would be moving around as they do.
No.
Yeah.
You follow the journey on land. What's happened in the sky, you can follow it on land. So we found other things. We went in search. Anglo-Saxon Chronicle says that, you know, and they, the British, gathered together all the treasures of Britain in one place and buried them, and no man has ever seen them since.
Okay.
We know where they are.
And
We know where they are.
just to finish, Alan. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously, we could probably do a whole series of programs on your
Go on all
information in all of these books.
Yeah.
You know, would somebody not have perhaps dug that thing up behind closed doors if after you've revealed the location, or do you think it's still there?
Oh, it's still there.
And so, what are the likelihood of it being dug up, or do you think the lid's been closed on this? Or
I think the government has to take a hand. I think authority has to step in.
okay,
Firstly, if just for job creation, if just for wealth creation on a permanent basis in a depressed area.
it would revolutionise the tourism industry of Wales, wouldn't it?
In 1986, we had the unedifying sight of 2 large coaches going around parts of Wales, full of politicians and bureaucrats and about 12 Japanese gentlemen,
Right.
who said, give us £150 million of your money, we will build a factory with it and employ 5,000 people,
Right.
make motor cars. In the event, the factory went to Sunderland, not to South Wales.
Right. Right.
Now, and it only ever employed 3,000.
Right.
We haven't asked them for a cent. Right? And we'll create thousands of jobs. All we're asking them to do is dig a hole.
Yeah.
Now, there's a big difference, you know.
Yeah. It's just blows my mind that they won't look at that and take you seriously, Alan. And you know, we'll have to invite you back to you know, discuss some more of your work. But really, thank you very much indeed for coming in, Alan. It's fascinating. I need to read some of your books and expand my knowledge of history. So thanks very much indeed.
It's a pleasure.
Okay.
See, this gives covenant men, or covenant land, a whole new meaning. Yes, this land is the home of the people of the covenant. But what if this is literally telling us that this is the land the covenant is laying in, meaning the Ark of the Covenant? It is not only the united kingdom of Jacob, but the home of Moses' descendants, the Levites. And the Levites actually were the only ones who could carry the Ark of the Covenant, and if other people tried to, they would literally die. So like I said earlier, I'm going to go into a few traits that are common throughout these islands, as well as in Scandinavia, where the descendants of Moses and Levi will be living. These traits are usually used against this group of people in order to claim they are not Israelites. However, if you truly look into scripture and sources throughout history, it is evident that red hair is actually a prominent trait of the Edomic lineage. I'm going to play a quick video from Watch Jerusalem explaining the tribe of Simeon and Levi and how they are in the British Isles.
One final point about the Welsh, the Scots, and the Irish, and this is to do with redheads. There's a stereotype of Irish redheads, but actually Scotland has the highest percentage, with 13% of the population being redheads and an estimated 40%, carrying the genes. Now, around 10% of Welsh and Irish populations are redheaded, and the majority of these Irish are in the north of the island, Northern Ireland and northwest Ireland. So here we've got Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland as our significant preponderance of red-headed people. And we've mentioned the migration of the Scots to this area now of Northern Ireland. So a close connection here between Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales. Now, Jewish Midrash tradition holds that red hair was common among the tribes of Simeon and Levi. And this tradition was taken to the point that one 19th century Jewish commentator wrote that most of the high priests had red hair. And I'm sure you've heard of the classic stereotype of redheads having a fiery temper. But guess what? That's exactly what the tribes of Levi and Simeon were named for. And so maybe there's some ancestral truth behind that stereotype. Now, where do we find red-headed people around the world? I've mentioned the predominance of them in Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales, but it's virtually exclusively among Israelite nations that we find red-headed people. It's practically a marker of Israelite DNA, really, primarily in the northern and western fringes of Europe, especially within the British Isles and, again, in particular, in the Celtic nations. The story is completely different in non-Israelite foreign nations, with just fractions of percentages. But there is a high level of redheads among Jews. Some 6% of Polish Jews were found to have red hair, 11% of all Jewish men with red beards. It's such an Israelite trait that in the Spanish Inquisition, those identified with red hair were automatically considered Jewish. And remember that a large population of Israelites made up the Jews of the southern kingdom of Judah, and that Simeon was also originally within that southern kingdom of Judah. So this is a distinctly Israelite marker and identified in Jewish traditions, particularly with the tribes of Levi and Simeon. And where do we find it? Among the Jews, the Irish, Scots, and Welsh. And again, the stereotypes run deep across different cultures and historical accounts that redheads are fiery, daring, high-tempered, mischievous, strong, adventurous, all traits that particularly match of all the tribal patriarchs with Simeon and Levi. All right, we've run out of time on this program, but I'll leave some links on the podcast page on our website that describe the importance of Scotland and Wales as part of the United Kingdom. One of these articles is entitled, "Without Scotland, There is No Great Britain," referencing the Scottish independence referendum and the disunity within the United Kingdom. And there's a lot of disunity, a lot of disagreement, brokenness within the United Kingdom, within Scotland itself, within Wales itself, England itself. And as we repeatedly talk about on this program, all of that is the result of sin, turning away from God. And the Bible foretells that one final major conflict is to befall the nations of Jacob, the tribes of Israel, as punishment for our people's turning away from God. Jeremiah 30 verse 7 calls this a time of tribulation for the end-time descendants of Jacob like none ever experienced before. The worst so far that has befallen our nations has been World War II. And so if we are to consider the Bible true, this coming time has to be even worse. And in all of it, God is seeking repentance and humility from his people who once knew him, from his chosen people, something our stubborn nations find difficult to swallow.
Now, this is very contrary to most of the things you hear about this bloodline, such as gingers have no soul, the devil has blue eyes, redheads are witches. In fact, if you saw my last video on the Israelites, you would know that the Edomic lineage, represented by the Israelites, has very specific traits that separate them from the rest of humanity and give clues to their lineage. That being said, not all Israelites will express these traits. Not every Israelite will be rhesus negative blooded. Not every rhesus negative blooded person will be an Israelite. You have to understand that the Israelites are an elect group from amongst the Edomic lineage, and the Edomic lineage is the rhesus negative bloodline. Therefore, numerous other tribes and bloodlines that come from the Edomic lineage may also carry rhesus negative blood, but not have direct paternal descent to Jacob. That being said, these traits, like red hair, will be very common amongst the tribes of Reuben, Levi, Simeon, and Judah. Why these tribes? Well, they descend from the same father and mother. Their mother Leah was the daughter of Laban. Now Laban means pure white, and Rebekah, the wife of Isaac and mother of Jacob, would therefore also be pure white if her brother is. Now yes, this does mean that Jacob married and had children with his cousin. Now why would that be? Well, we have to understand that they were trying to maintain this bloodline and keep it pure and intact. Therefore, traits like red hair would have been prominent amongst this group because they had two parents coming from a rhesus negative bloodline. See, I bring this up because the whole reason Laban and Rebekah are pure white is because of their rhesus negative bloodline, which would also give them traits like red hair, which also showed up in Jacob and Rebekah's firstborn son, Esau. And in my Israelite video, I explain how it is not only Esau, but also Jacob whose descendants would carry the red hair trait. And in an upcoming video, I'm going to show you how to differentiate Jacob from Esau. But for now, I want to tie in white skin or Laban's skin with red hair. Now you might be thinking, how does this exactly prove that Laban would be rhesus negative? You know, he could still be white and have white skin without being rhesus negative. Well, there are hints throughout the Bible that show that this group of people, the Israelites, were rhesus negative, at least predominantly. Now, Lamentations chapter 4 verse 7 claims that the Nazarites were purer than snow, whiter than milk. They were more ruddy in body than rubies, their polishing was of sapphire. Now, people like to claim that purer than snow, whiter than milk is referring to their spirit. However, the next line completely contradicts this theory, as it is clearly talking about their body and how they looked. So how could you be purer than snow and look white, but have polishing of sapphire? Well, the purer than snow, whiter than milk is referring to their white skin. The ruddy is referring to the fact that these people turn red, either due to sunburn or possibly just due to good health and the fact that blood shows through the skin. The sapphire is referring to their blue veins. Now, rhesus negative blooded people have a higher content of copper in their blood, meaning their blood actually shows as blue. And as you know, many royal lineages throughout European history have been known as blue bloods and actually intermarried within each other, sort of how Jacob married his cousin, because they wanted to maintain the bloodline and make sure they weren't diluting their blood and could keep their blessings. So, though the Nazarites' hair color isn't mentioned, we know that they are white-skinned and have prominent blue veins. We also know this bloodline carries the red hair trait, and the evidence is in people like Leah, people like Laban, and Laban is just one example. However, I bring up Laban because his daughter Leah married Jacob and had the sons Levi and Simeon, meaning Levi would definitely carry the trait of red hair, meaning Moses would also carry the trait of red hair, ultimately showing you that this is why many of the people throughout the British Isles and Scandinavia have red hair. These lands are the amalgamation of numerous tribes descending primarily through the same two parents, Jacob and Leah. And besides Ephraim and Manasseh, the two most prominent tribes in the UK are Levi and Judah. So it all makes sense why red hair is so prominent there. So that's going to be the end of the video, and I hope I wasn't bouncing all over the place and, unclear on my message. But to sum everything up, the United Kingdom and Scandinavia are the two places in which most of the descendants of Moses would live. And in my upcoming video identifying the different haplotypes of the Bible, I will explain why Judah's bloodline is ultimately diluted within the Middle East and within Jerusalem, and how the percentage of Moses' descendants there would be much smaller than it would be in the UK. So thank you for watching, I appreciate it, and have a great day.